This is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready. We're about to live in your head rent-free.
This is episode 206.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
And I'm Marcus.
And I'm Cajun.
Well, boys, we're all back together again. This is Francis in the captain's chair this time. Special treat this episode for our history episode. I don't know why we never did this before because it's such an obvious thing.
We have danced around it.
We have danced around it a lot.
We have done a show on this topic.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah,
We just haven't delved deep into this aspect.
Exactly. We're going to go with the history of bourbon. Really. Seriously. We ourselves are amateur aficionados. I'd like to say that. We're certainly not in the industry, but we're surrounded by the industry where we live and where we grew up, and some of us. And there's just a lot of stuff as we've been kind of kicking around different ideas. This one kind of floated to the top, saying, "Why don't we do this?" Actually, it was Cajun's the one who came up with the idea,
and even more so since we're in Studio C out here on the ranch, right in the middle of Nelson County.
That's exactly right. We are in bourbon country, the Holy Land, as we record this. You know, it's literally. Bourbon seeds are all around us, as Cajun would say, that will be used in future distilling operations.
That's right. I mean, bourbon is a vegetable. By law, it is 51% corn.
That's exactly right. Very good. That's
good point.
That's a very slick way of putting that little factoid in there, sir.
Bourbon is a
vegetable. You can drink your vegetables in and still be healthy.
Exactly. Well, I don't know about the last part, but we can drink our vegetables.
Hey, it's a cure-all.
You know,
very true.
Little column A, little column B.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, we're literally on the back side of the Log Still Distillery complex here.
That is correct. The ranch backs right up to their property line.
You can walk
and that is a very fine facility. I look forward to one day doing the tour there, but just going into their little tasting bar.
Yeah, the tasting room, the little bar there that they have.
Was phenomenal when we did that several months ago now, but very nice facility there.
Gorgeous. Yeah. Big congrats to Wally Dan on
and for making that. And we'll talk a little bit about the history of that place because it touches in my family history a little bit. That's one of the reasons Cajun said, "Why don't you do this, Captain, this one?" I said, "Okay, we can do that." But bourbon's been around for a long, long time. But to be honest, it took it to get to Kentucky to get perfected. Is that a fair statement, guys?
To a degree, yes. I mean, the climate here, the water.
It is definitely perfected here.
Yes,
but I don't know that again, I am ignorant of this, so please, how was it brought here?
Well, it came mostly through the English. It's a very English
because
type
distilling,
thing.
Making whiskey, definitely. Matter of fact, it was...
Scots and Irish, I would say, more so than
correct.
the English.
Because it's not Scottish, it's crap.
Especially in Robert's home area with the miners and so forth, with the high Scottish, and of course started out with moonshining there, basically.
That's correct.
Which is the unaged product that bourbon starts as.
Yeah. Right. So actually, that's a great point that probably most people wouldn't even realize is that bourbon before it's put in the barrels is clear. It is very much
right.
It is a shine kind of thing.
Are clear and can be made from lots of grains.
Right.
So you have that going on all up and down, the eastern seaboard. Any place that grain will grow.
Right.
What's the easiest way to transport that grain when it's done? Distill it, put it in barrels, and put it on a boat somewhere.
And that's how this whole episode idea started.
Yeah.
I was saying, well, back in the day, they grew all this grain and the easy transport. You couldn't just load up corn and keep it fresh and send it down to New Orleans down on the flatboats. I mean, that was a major transportation way in this area. In the spring, when the rivers and these local smaller rivers would rise up and allow the boats to travel to get to the Ohio. And then from Ohio, Mississippi, and on down to that wonderful city of New Orleans.
Yeah. Right, because, back in the day when we're talking about when all of this started, that was the preeminent export port.
Right.
Yeah, that's where you sent everything from the U.S. back to Europe if you weren't sending it from
New York or Boston.
From the eastern seaboard.
Right, yeah,
Anywhere
Charleston.
from the interior, especially, and of course, corn whiskey most likely probably is moving this direction from Pennsylvania.
As a general rule, Pittsburgh is the hub. That's where a lot of it started. That's where they go
Western
to get to the western part.
Is a place where corn was grown more so than other crops. But yes, it's moving from the Carolinas. It's moving from
Yeah, and the waterways, they flow south.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Towards New
Well,
Orleans.
this
Well,
way.
it's important to remember too, folks, that bourbon is made 51% corn, as Robert stated.
As a minimum, it can be more.
It can be more, but that's at least that. That's because bourbon does not predate the discovery of America, because corn was here. It was unknown in Europe until the Europeans came here, and this is one of the things the Native Americans here gave to us.
Very colorful Indian corn, which you see the multicolors that everybody recognizes.
That's right.
God bless the Native Americans for giving us maize.
That's
We
right.
can
Because
ultimately
that's
have
where
bourbon.
that's how we were able to, over time, continue to refine and figure things out. And a lot of it goes back to the 13 colonies. Is when we started to industrialize a lot of this, which is that's a primitive form of industrialization, but it was very local. Marcus?
I do have a correction, apparently, for our initial starting out as far as the vegetable goes.
Yes.
It is actually a fruit. It is a caryopsis, a single-seeded fruit.
Corn,
where the corn is, where the seed pod and the flesh are tightly joined together.
Okay.
So it is indeed not a vegetable, but it can be classified as a grain. But botanically speaking, it's a fruit.
Yes, there has been a lot of. In fact, I've been at exercises where we'll all take positions on what is a corn, what is it? Is it a grain? Is it a fruit? Is it a vegetable? Et cetera, et cetera.
Is cereal a soup?
Well, it's exactly the same argument. It's a semantic.
Tomato.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of one of those. It's complicated, as Travis Slattery would say. That's always the best way.
We'll stick with grain.
The technical term would be caryopsis.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, corns and vegetables, even though it's more letters, vegetables easier to say.
Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah, but nevertheless, it's still the thing that is the essence, the kernel, dare I say, of this entire process.
Hold on. For kernel, the kernel pun.
You think that gets a
word boner? No.
Oh,
you
you made that? Oh, okay. Well.
Agonizer.
Oh, come on. The pun is the highest form of humor, gentlemen.
It is the lowest form of humor.
That's another agonizer.
You're not supposed to agonize the captain, guys.
I thought the lowest form of humor was just being a husband.
Oh, Lord. Skip a bit, brother. Let us
who would
move forward.
pun would pick a pocket.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Maturin over there. But anyway, you're going to get us off the subject here quickly, which is...
Yes, because we are so good at staying on subject.
Yes, that's right. You might as well just call us Rabbit Hole, which is the name of a very fine bourbon.
Yes, that is on our list of bourbons to try today, because we are at Bourbon Fest.
That is correct.
That's why we're all down here.
Yeah.
I mean, we're down here to enjoy Cajun's wonderful hospitality here at
the ranch.
Yes,
the ranch.
exactly right. Yeah, and we this is the second day, as we record this, second day of the Bourbon Fest, so we spent one day doing a lot of it, and this is kind of a priming the pump in many ways for so much experience and to explain just how great bourbon is as so many things. But the history of it is somewhat it's somewhat clear in many ways.
Clouded too.
That's
that's right. Nobody kind of knows where the using that name.
Well, apparently
really came from.
Well, apparently the bourbon name bourbon didn't start get associated until later in the process, much later.
Right.
So it's
it's just corn liquor.
Yeah,
right.
Whiskey is a common term.
Yes, it is a whiskey.
Yeah,
all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon.
That's right, exactly. And it's spelt WHISKEY here and without an E in Tennessee. So I've been told.
I believe it's without an E in Europe too, for the most part.
That's correct. So there's
the phrase whiskey.
Scottish whiskey, Scotch, is KY.
KY. That's right, without the E.
And then that stuff you get in Canada and Tennessee has the E in it.
Well, and that makes sense why we would call it then. Well, you said no. You said Scotch has the E, right?
No.
It has no E. Sorry.
Irish whiskey and Scotch
have no E.
Generally, you spell it KY.
Okay.
No E.
Well, I guess it's fair to say, starting out early, like we say, it was a simple way to transport your corn product and something more monetarily available.
Yeah,
and it wasn't until after the Revolutionary War that the feds had to step in and decided, hey, we can make money off this, let's tax it.
That's
yes,
exactly right.
And then became a whole different animal than the person doing it on their own and adding more structure to the system, I guess you could say.
Well, yeah, it was an attempt to regulate it in many ways.
Well, and, let's face it. One thing that we didn't talk about, I think, in our making a government episode on the Revolution was that very quickly those extreme libertarian founders said, "Hey, you know what? This government thing's pretty good. We should start taxing shit."
That's right. Yeah, even though it took them 100, or almost 150 years to get to the income tax itself, which is a particular.
Well, that was banned initially.
Yeah,
as
it was
part of the
it was a
Constitution.
pernicious animal of that particular thing. But
Shame it didn't
nevertheless,
stay that way.
yeah, I know a lot of things change with regards to that. Let's not rabbit hole too much here. We're trying to stick on the history.
But it is a major piece of this, though. Again, is Whiskey Rebellion. Again, that's Pennsylvania. It's an excise tax on corn liquor, and that's part of the history and part of.
I mean, it's been combative between the individuals making it and the federal government, like you say.
Oh yeah, this
those damn
Tax,
revenuers.
prohibition. I mean, repealing it.
Yeah, that and one of the things that's really interesting about this too is this is something that it was very an individual thing. These are you think about it, most of the country is individual farmers making their own living, their own way, and they would partner with local distilleries, and they were all local at first. I mean, it was just that's your neighbor that does that part, and everybody else grows. And you take it to him, sell it, and he sells it, blah blah blah, and it's just the general expansion of trade. I mean, it's something that enabled the economy and people to better themselves because it's easier to sell your grain, as you said, Cajun, to the local distiller than it is to ship it somewhere. Everything is local at this point until you make it transportable.
You can't put it on a train and send it to Chicago.
Well, because there ain't no train.
There ain't no Chicago.
Days. Yeah, that's true too. That's yeah. Which I'm glad you said that too, because you're right. The distilling goes back to the colonial days. I mean, and it was something that was done in Maryland and Virginia, which is the two primary feeders into Kentucky after the war.
Yes.
However, something magical happened here. And this is kind of where we take this from everybody's doing this distilling thing, and it becomes something very special because two things, one of which is probably the best is the water here in this holy ground in Kentucky.
It is unique.
It is unique. It is completely unique, and it is because of the limestone bed all through this area here. The climate is also a very mild and moderate. You have all 4 seasons.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
And that's the key.
That's the real key.
Once you
relatively mild and short winters.
That's right.
And very warm, humid summers.
That's right. And you get all of these.
Draw the stuff out of the barrels,
right? Which kind of
pushes it into the barrels and then draws it back out.
Right,
which is important because you got to have both.
Right, and all the pine, because the pine, charred pine is essential. Excuse me, did I say
white oak in particular?
Did I say
yes.
pine? I knew
pine.
better than that. I don't
Not
know.
head.
Yeah, very.
Oh
good.
no, another pun.
That's right.
Pun.
Okay, yeah. Charred oak.
Have another?
Yeah. Bend over, here it comes. Okay, but you're right. The trees themselves, which were abundant throughout here.
Yes, this state was literally edge to edge
forest.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's just the way
old growth
and
oak
thick.
forest.
That's right. And that's kind of the way the rolling hills of Kentucky are. I mean, you get out west, it's a little bit flatter, but essentially where we're at in central Kentucky, north central, it's all that. I mean, it was the happy hunting ground. There no Indian tribes were native to here. They all kind of came and went out of here because the wildlife is plentiful, still is actually. It was, and the Indian tribes of this area were not particularly agrarian. They were more hunter-gatherer styles. So that's why they made this the destination area. This was the hunting resort for so long. But the water was plentiful, and the limestone. It was just kind of like the magic came together. And when they started in the late 1700s, the distillers started coming around. We kind of revere these guys now. In fact, we will talk about this when we get into the more modern era. So many of those brands that we know now go back to the distillers of the old days, and sometimes very far back.
Yes, 1820s in that.
Well, that's even late, actually.
Yeah.
One of the brands that Barton's puts out is 1792. That's one of the year they're marking for when they began doing things.
Well, that's also the years that Kentucky became a state. I
Correct.
think it may have more to do with that than.
Yeah,
But you're right. Some of the brands are
Mm-hmm.
their reference of very old people that are said to have been the first distiller or the first person to.
well, yeah, and most of those, and
that's Elijah Craig and Evan Williams and the Mythos.
1783 on Evan
Yeah.
Williams.
Yeah,
Right.
That's,
around
and,
those
and I'm glad you mentioned that, because 1783 is really the beginnings of when that people began coming here. That's when.
Well, that's when the Revolutionary War was over.
Right, and when you could, because most of the settlers in this particular area, there's 3 counties in particular here in central Kentucky. Nelson County, which is kind of the largest in the central. You have Washington County to one side. You have Marion County slightly south. Those were 3. We call them the Holy Lands because that's where Catholicism started. Everybody that came here came from Maryland as Catholics to escape persecution in many respects, because after the war, all of a sudden the British are gone, and those old hatreds from the old country have started to resurface, religious hatreds. And Maryland.
Well, it's not like the Brits were always very friendly to the Catholics either.
That's correct, but at least the Catholics, Maryland was particularly the eastern shore of Maryland, was where all the Catholics came to escape the crown and the persecution. Well, a lot of the Protestants came into Virginia, which is just across the Potomac. After the war's over, these old hatreds begin to come back again, and that's when
Feckin' Protestants.
Careful now. But we love our Protestant brothers and sisters.
We do.
Yes, we do. Nevertheless, that's when they realized that. Plus, there's opportunities west. This is what we've talked about that a little bit in Manifest Destiny. You've got this ability all of a sudden to come over the Alleghenies, and a deal was struck by some. With many families, it's called the League of Families in this southern area, eastern shore of Maryland, Prince George County, Charles County, Calvert County. They all decided, they were sold a bill of goods that, why don't you come to Kentucky? Because the land is good there. It's open up now. It's
part of the war settlement too.
It's part of the war settlement. That's right. It's
yes,
part of,
each state had to basically give up whatever was west of a certain point.
Right. So they basically said, you can go out there and be there, and you don't have to worry about your neighbors anymore.
And at the same time, people in New England are being told, hey, the Ohio, this Northwest Territory that we have now, that's available to you. So people are moving west, both south and north of the Ohio River, and it's a key piece of all of this.
That's right.
As those people move and begin to populate these areas.
Yeah, because it's easy to get here by coming down the Ohio River. That's literally how that's done. And that's, in fact, the story has still survive about how some, it was not all that safe at times. When Basil Hayden and his group of 25, which is one of the 2 original settlements, the other came to St. Charles area in Marion County, which is a little bit further south here. That was the other early one. The main one that still is, it's in the Holy Cross, Kentucky, is the center point.
Yeah,
that's where they came. They literally came down the Ohio to the falls, because Louisville doesn't even exist yet, by the way. But you can't get.
But it's the reason Louisville exists.
That's exactly, because you really can't get past the
You
falls.
can get there, and then you've got a portage around the falls, and continue to
move on
to the Mississippi.
Which is why that's why they were sold this land out here. It was plentiful. Nobody was here, and they basically got off at Louisville and trekked, which by car today is about 45 minutes. It was a lot longer. Through no roads, just a lot of and no real waterways that would get you into this area easily. So they ported overland. They ended up.
They're probably lucky they're making 10, 15 miles a day, depending on what they were traveling with coming through the wilderness.
Especially coming through the wilderness. It's hard for us to imagine what it would have been like for them, because we have no real, especially those of us that are in very settled areas, we just don't have any understanding of how thick a real forest is.
But there's a little bit of around here because most of that forest still exists here.
But it doesn't go on for hundreds of miles.
That's right, exactly. There's roads, they get you through.
Yeah, they were restricted to game trails, buffalo trails, and so forth.
Yeah.
I mean, the buffaloes was the first road builders in this area that would come through in their massive herds and clear away. I mean,
and the geography here in central Kentucky, Nelson County, Kentucky, it's very hilly. It's knobs is what we call them. And I mean, just sitting in, if you look out the doors and the windows of where we're at, there's knobs all around. I mean, it's very high elevation, and we're down in a valley, essentially. That's where a lot of this limestone water came from. The folks that came down overland, they came to a place called Goodwin's Fort, which is literally on the other side of New Haven, which is where we're at right now. In fact, when Robert and Marcus came in, you passed by the marker that marks approximately where that was.
Yes, it's been years since I read it, but I do remember there's a marker there.
That marker, which is approximate because they really don't know it doesn't stand, but that's where they would come to. And they went over to Holy Cross, which is not that far from really where we're standing today. And they settled all around that. Holy Cross is the first Catholic church west of the Alleghenies, and the original, of course, it was originally a log cabin. That land was deeded to the Catholic Church here locally after the bishop, Bishop Flagey, was named as Bishop of Bardstown.
Which was the largest diocese ever created.
That is correct, because essentially it's anything west of the Alleghenies. Yeah, that's you, and Bardstown because that's because Catholics.
That's where they were
west of the Alleghenies and the Appalachians.
That's
the Alleghenies are more Pennsylvania, but yes.
Exactly. That's where we're at here.
And they had the unique modified being the proto cathedral, right?
Oh, I'm getting there. You're exactly right. That stayed in Bardstown. That became the seat of it. That's a little bit later because when we're coming in here, there's nothing. And they built Holy Cross Church, which was a log cabin.
It's interesting to think that the diocese. Bardstown predates Louisville.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the seat of the diocese. So
Bardstown became that.
Yeah,
but it didn't become a diocese until 1808.
Yeah.
And we've had, that's 30 years or so after the first Catholics came here, and all they had were circuit priests. Father Stephen Baden was the one who would literally ride around this whole countryside on horseback and have mass for these people in their homes, because that's all you had. And it was shortly, and I cannot remember. I don't remember the exact date, but it was sometime in the early 1790s. Is when Basil Hayden, who's a very important name as we know, he was the leader of this group of 25 that came to Holy Cross. He deeded, and you can go into Bardstown, you can find the original deed. I've got a copy of it. It's very easy to see. He deeded the land to the church, which became Holy Cross Church today. And you can go see the church. It was rebuilt in the 1780s. In the 1850s. The original church it's a log cabin. That's all you got these days.
Yeah.
But there's a huge stone cross and a marker towards the back of the cemetery where the original church stood. They built the other one, but the cemetery is still there because that's what you do when you have a church. You bury your dead around the church. Well, I mean, my great grandfather, his stone still stands there, and it's he died in 1838. But he was an old man. He was one of those original families that came of that 25. I can trace to about 20 of them.
So, Francis, not to because I always love listening to you talk about your family.
I'm trying not to get too much in that.
Yes. How does all of that relate to bourbon?
Because that's one of the things that you do when you get down here. They discovered fairly quickly that distilling corn is a way, as you said, to transport it and to make it. And they discovered very quickly that, wow, this can be very good. It can be very lucrative. We can sell this via barrels. And they came up with the process. Basil Hayden, this is where I'm tying that family back.
Right, I was just trying to get you back on track there. That's all.
Right. Basil Hayden, who was the leader of this group, is also a distiller.
Right.
And in fact, Jim Beam owns the brand today of Basil Hayden. It was actually the first brand of bourbon we really took off on. Well, he is a Catholic pioneer as well as a distiller. And the family is actually rather famous and rather prolific too. I mean, he is a direct ancestor of mine. He was
that
one.
may make the family somewhat infamous, but all right.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that. I'll give you a little side story that, on a history of that. Basil Hayden, the original. I know, yes,
Don't lead him on.
Cajun is wagging his finger at Robert because he's let me
He
tell us.
opened the door.
I don't know what I was thinking.
It's actually a rather funny story. It's kind of sad in many respects. Basil Hayden that we talk about is actually known as Basil Hayden Sr. Because because there are 3 generations of Basil Haydens. The original, of course, is Basil Hayden Sr. that came down. He has a Basil Hayden son, Basil Hayden Jr., who has a son, Basil Hayden III. Basil Hayden III was known as the eccentric. He vowed, and this is, you're talking about 1860s here, in late 1850s, he vowed if Abraham Lincoln won the election in 1860, he would not leave his house and he would not cut his beard. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. The distillery business that he and his family ran, he ran from his window of his home for the rest of his life.
This explains a lot in your bloodline.
Doesn't it, though? Those who say, well, if nothing else, I admire the man's convictions because he said something and he stuck to it.
Yeah.
All those people who declare that they will leave the country if so-and-so is elected on both sides, they never leave. They lack the courage of their convictions.
Yes, like I said, that's why he's known as Basil Hayden the eccentric, because he was definitely that. Eventually, that's just one family, though. There were many other distilleries around.
Yeah, another one to note, Elijah Craig at that same time.
That is correct. Who was
myth. Most people want to convert to him being the inventor of bourbon in the area. Of course, we've just established that's pretty much a myth. And it was also attributed to him that he figured out using charred oak in his barrels.
See, that's something
because he had a fire there, and he was such a tightwad, he said, use them anyway, don't throw them out.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of been busted on the line. It actually turns out it ended up being a tremendous marketing effect by the Elijah Craig brand.
Right.
To perpetrate this story, they submitted it to newspapers. I forget the dates, but when all this happened, it just kind of took off and it spread around the country.
Yeah, and that's
throughout various newspapers, establishing this myth of Elijah Craig being the first to use the charred oak.
It was a lot harder to fact check things back then.
Absolutely,
it was.
Yeah, and there was, and in many respects, Elijah Craig was Protestant, by the way. That Catholic-Protestant divide still persisted a little bit down here. But once everybody kind of got on the idea of, well, this bourbon business is pretty cool, and all of a sudden, all that magic happens when it all comes together. The charred oak barrels, the water here, it really changed everything, and it became an enormous industry. Very quickly, although it stayed pretty local for a long time.
Well, whiskey, as we said, Scotch came here. They brought the Scots came here knowing how to do that. So the methods themselves are not new.
No, the actual distilling part.
This is nothing new.
Yeah, that's not something the Indians developed.
Right. But what really it is the corn.
Yeah.
The water.
Yes, changing
and the seasons.
Yeah. Changing the grain to corn.
Yes.
That's what you could grow and what you'd have here.
Yeah.
And
because in England it was all gin. That's what they were doing because they didn't have anything other than that.
So, there's a lot of things that go into the origin of bourbon.
Right.
A lot of it is happenstance, but those 3 things are the key. And
4, the yeast strains.
Well, yes.
Some of these master distillers went out and collected wild yeast strains, messing with them, and found a particular one they liked and stuck with it, which when I toured the Beam Distillery, they touched on that. The yeast strain was such a guarded secret with the original founders he was bringing it back and forth from home in a cooler, basically. It was not left at the distillery for fear that something would happen or a fire would break out in those days.
Right.
Well, yes, as we know, fire is a very dangerous thing. There have been numerous fires.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Heaven Hill had a really nasty one.
Massive conflagration.
And speaking of that, that's probably about 14 miles away from where we're sitting right now, and I could see the flames in the sky the night that
Yes, because this was
Rick House caught on fire.
Yeah, this was not that long ago. I mean,
No.
relatively speaking, but
30 years, 25 years,
I was
somewhere
say
in
20,
there.
25 years or so, and it was huge.
Less than that, I think.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, maybe even only a decade. But it was.
I think it was more than a decade.
Longer than a decade. Popped up on my Facebook feed a while back.
Yeah,
Okay.
and wasn't there a more recent one in the last
Yes.
5 years?
Yes, there was.
Well, we've had everything from rick house collapses to
Yes.
fires.
Yeah, because it's a huge industry now all
Oh,
over
yeah.
the world, and
Was
it
it-
all comes here.
Was it Heaven Hill where all of the bourbon got into the local
Water source.
Water
yeah,
source,
that's right.
yeah.
No, that was up at Frankfurt.
Frankfurt.
Okay.
That was up at one of the Frankfurt distilleries. I don't think it was Buffalo Trace, but
There's
it could have been. But now, when the Heaven Hill Rick House burned, I mean, literally, it was rivers of fire going down into the streams around that area too.
It's like we were in Cleveland in the 70s
when
when the Cuyahoga caught on fire.
that's kind of that. What? Yeah, it was a huge deal.
Now, for being such a
Two fires in Heaven
a
Hill.
religious center as
Yeah.
we are here, it's kind of interesting. Kentucky has been the home of a good majority of what we would consider traditional American vices. Tobacco,
Amen, brother.
Tobacco,
Yeah.
marijuana.
Well,
Yes.
The best marijuana was always grown in Kentucky and southern Indiana. And
Same soil as the corn.
same soils as corn.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's very prolific for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And and not to go off on a rabbit hole, but it was marijuana was and probably still is an enormous cash crop in this very area where we're at.
the
What?
largest cash crop in Kentucky for many, many years.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Heaven Hill fire was 1996, so we're about 28 years since that massive one happened.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. I remember very well.
Yeah, that was huge news for a long time.
And Heaven Hill, I'll get as one of the major distillers, and Bardstown is still ground zero in many respects, but it's spread out. Frankfurt has you go up and down 64 between Louisville and Lexington, and there's how many? What, 8? Smaller and larger. You
Easily,
get
probably more now.
Exactly. Wild Turkey is out there. Woodford is out there. Jephthah Creed is out there.
Four Roses.
And those are just the
Four
ones that you
Roses.
see right on
Yeah,
64.
Yeah, those are the ones that you have a sign, come tour us.
Well, and the origin of those being on along that area, it's very much similar to how bourbon gets associated with the waterways. It's a way to travel. It's a defined shipping path. Whether granted they weren't highways, but
It was for that time.
well, not like we have now, is what I
No,
mean.
no.
Yeah,
No,
but
some
there's
of
a
them are, yeah.
defined road that they can move the bourbon.
Well, some of them, because some of these are only within the last 30, 40 years.
Yes, there has been an explosion.
Yeah, Jephthah Creed is practically brand new. Buffalo Trace is huge. Woodford is not that old. I'd hate to. You
Well,
guys
the
have toured it.
distillery that they are at is pretty old.
Yeah.
The Woodford brand itself
That's it. Yeah.
is not that old.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things when we're talking about history of bourbon here, you cannot ignore the fact that by the time the 1880s, 90s, 19-teens, 20 and early 20s come along, this place is littered with distilleries, and many of them are teeny-weeny, small-time operations. Still, there's no conglomeration.
It's all across the state again, Owensboro area, and in Louisville, and out here,
That's right.
and in lots of places. And like anything, over the years, names change, owners change. They get sold to a hedge fund. The hedge fund resells it. And
But there's,
conglomerates.
a lot of that's that's a little ahead of, though, because most of what's happening here in this time period is they're locally changing ownerships and things like that.
Yeah.
And they have their own brands. And those brands, and when we were down at the Fraser Museum, we saw some of the old retired brands that we'd never heard of.
Right.
Because they literally, they went
They
out of
did. They
business.
named them after themselves.
That's right.
That's
yeah.
what Pappy is named for, is the fellow that ran that distillery. But
Well, absolutely. I mean,
JTS Brown and J.W. Dant and
yeah,
these names,
that's
they all do mean something. It's not just made up. There's a mythos, again, around a lot of the names, but they are the genuine people
who
were involved
started
in these.
something there.
Right.
And a lot of times, sometimes the businesses would go under, sometimes they'd get sold. But the plants, the physical plants, would often, if they were in large enough operation, they would get. They're still around. Some of those, even and
they would get picked up.
They would get and the Dant family is probably the most interesting, literally because we're on the backside of it. That was a very large operation post Prohibition, which we'll go back to get Prohibition here in a minute. That had several brands that went out, and we're still trying to figure out exactly when that happened. In the late 40s, early 50s. And because in my lifetime, that distillery back there, literally, it's not been operating. Yeah, that goes back. My memory goes back to the early 70s.
Right, until recently when they've restarted.
Until Wally Dant.
Right, because the Dant family sold their operation.
Yeah, they lost
the legal rights to use their name on bourbon.
Because they sold those. They sold that.
Right. I mean, whether you say it's sold or lost, whatever, they don't have the rights for it.
Kevin Hill bought the rights to the J.W. Dant brand, which is that family.
Now they are logged still and make a very fine bourbon called Monk's Road.
Which is, as I think we've talked about, the reason it's called that is because literally from where they stand, the Archabbey of Gethsemane is about 2 miles literally up the straight road. And locals like ourselves, me and Cajun, that's always been called Monk's Road. That's just where you go. It's the Monk's Road. And that's why they took that name here locally. All right. Speaking of bourbon,
Bourbon break.
We have a special treat this time, folks. And we want to thank Cajun again for his hospitality in providing the bourbon that we're drinking here. Although Martin deserves a little bit of credit for this one because he's the one that kind of figured
located the deal and I closed it.
Yeah, kind of a secondary market sort of deal here.
Which is huge.
Picked up
that's a whole other episode.
Yeah, 3 bottles of Blanton's, which is very difficult in this area to locate.
It is one of those. It is. I don't know if I want to use the word super premium. I know there's a term for it, but it's one of those holy grails. It's like the Pappy Van Winkle.
Well, not to that extent.
Not to that extent, but
no, it gets a lot of Hollywood exposure. You see,
yes.
Especially the John Wick movies. For the most recent one, I can top off my head, but I see it in many, many movies because the bottle is so unique.
Exactly.
What's on top?
They've taken the concept of makers where you make that bottle unique and you build your brand around that. They've taken it to the next level.
Yeah,
is what they've done.
Exactly.
And it is a damn fine bourbon. That's for sure.
But you know what
we're drinking today?
It is a very good bourbon, but I noticed because I had some last night after Cajun opened the bottle. Because obviously, the whole point of this weekend is
to let breathe a little, before we got
absolutely.
around to it today.
The whole point of the bourbon side of this weekend is to help him go through some of his open bottles.
That's right. Yeah,
and
here I open another one. What can I?
And here he goes and opens another one.
Right. Yeah. This was.
But we expected that one. Though.
Yeah, we knew that after because you acquired what you already had one. And you got 3 more?
Technically, I had 3. Me and my uncle emptied 1.
Okay.
And then 3 more. At the moment, I have 4 unopened bottles, plus the one we just opened.
There have been a few busts recently.
That's correct, because
that kind of thing.
There's some questionable legal practices around it. The actual practice itself is perfectly legal. Once you own it, you can do what you want to.
Now,
at one point, it was illegal to resell to privately.
Yes. Kentucky had to pass a law allowing a secondary bourbon market.
Yeah.
And so individuals can resell bourbon,
which has become an investment.
If you do it as a retailer, you have to keep really good records of the secondary bourbon that you're buying off of people. So yes, it is. If you
we've had a
discover a dusty old, there's been some arrests about this.
Kiss that mic.
Sorry, there have been some raids lately.
There have, yes, that's correct.
So, if you come across a dusty bottle in the cupboard, you can resell that bottle.
That's right.
If you sell it to a retailer, though, they are supposed to keep records of what they're doing.
Right. So back to the Blantons here. Tried it last night, and the initial taste is very good. This is a very smooth bourbon, good flavor. But one of the things I noticed last night, and I noticed this morning, because yes, we are day drinking, is that the ice really dilutes it quickly. It's some of them, the flavor really hangs around for quite a while.
Yeah.
But I mean, even the color gets diluted pretty quickly because we're using Cajun's Big Balls. I mean, his large spherical ice.
Oh, very large.
And so the ice lasts a long time. It takes a while to really
melt. That's an
melt.
advantage, I think, to this approach.
This is a bourbon that requires I think is best with very small amounts of ice, because it seems like the water almost overpowers.
I think there's some truth to that. Yes,
it weakens
It's
it more
fairly
than many.
Right. What's the proof on this?
Oh, we didn't look.
It's a light. I mean,
it's not.
Yeah, it's not like one of the 110 to 120s that we occasionally have.
No.
Yeah, like which is the Prohibition style of Old Forester, for example.
93.
Yeah.
Okay,
93, so that is a lower proof.
That's a low proof. Yeah, that's right. It's not, it's low as some, but
right.
It's an excellent. It's excellent when served neat as a sipping bourbon.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of its charms.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we discovered,
like you say, light ice or neat would be the way to go with this one.
Yeah,
very much so.
For the most part, we've never really. I don't think we've encountered that as a big deal to where the ice can overpower it. At least in the ones we've tried.
Right.
That's why I was a little surprised last night, because we are not guzzlers.
No,
we like to sip and enjoy
And
our
I think
bourbon.
that leads to like you say, it's a sweeter, it's a lighter
Yes.
note to it.
Yeah. It's
I dare to say it's almost like a dessert bourbon. Dessert
yeah, that's
wine.
I like
that. I like
It's more like a
that.
dessert bourbon.
It's definitely a summer bourbon for around here with the temperatures. It's a good porch sipping bourbon.
Yeah, I mean,
this
even
heat.
the watered down is still pretty good, because you know what? If somebody said, "Hey, let's sell this as flavored water," I'd buy that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
After you get it really diluted.
I think this would be an excellent
got a
one
good
for men or women, either one, but I'm going to lean more towards saying women that need to be introduced to a bourbon. This would be a good light bourbon with the ice melting in that would not overpower their taste.
That's
to begin with.
yes,
Yeah.
that's a good idea. I'll have to see if I can get my wife introduced to
introductory
bourbon this way.
Right.
For
Now, if you're going to pair Blanton's with a cigar, you want to stick with I'd highly recommend some of the Macanudos,
okay,
which are a milder, lighter cigar.
See, that's interesting you say that, because the guy from Yellowstone yesterday was going the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and a
he
lot
says
of
balance
people,
them out.
a lot of people will say things like that. The problem you'll get is it will, like you're saying with the ice, it'll overpower this bourbon.
Quite possibly. Obviously, that's always going to depend on the cigar itself.
But anything like a Maduro or something like that, you're going to really quickly overpower the tastes of this bourbon. When you go with something like a good Dominican shade wrapped light cigar like a Monte Cristo, it goes real well with it.
So, Cajun, we had talked about, when we set this up, doing a bourbon with cigars at some point.
Yes, we had.
So I presume we're going to do that this evening when we come back to record the third
some
episode.
cigars. I'm not sure what they would pair best with, but we can give it a
Well, I was
try,
thinking that
see.
we could stop at Cox's in town, because at least the ones in Louisville, they always have a good smoke selection. So I presume the one down here don't they?
We don't have one in Boston
No,
area.
no,
Oh, I thought there was a Cox's here.
no, there's not. But
Evergreen up there, they were talking about at the festival, one of the newest stores. I think they may have a selection.
Okay,
yeah, that's
Went
probably
by there
where-
and
I'll have to
see.
try that one. Yeah.
But getting back to the Blanton, does anybody pick up any particular notes they want to mention in this?
I was going to say
It's really nice and sweet.
Martin is one of the best with that.
Perhaps maybe a little chocolate.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah,
There's one.
it's
Could you hand me one to smell?
Oh, yes, absolutely, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, I'm a sniffer. It goes with the nose.
The nose, ladies and gentlemen.
Any particular note you picked up?
yeah. I don't know if I'd say it was chocolate for me. That
It would be a really sweet.
It is
milk
very
chocolate.
sweet,
It's
whether
not
it's-
like cacao type.
Yeah, I mean, I often will. My tongue because I drink a lot of stuff with caramel. I always pick up on that caramel creamy aspects, and I think there's some of that here, which can go in with
Yeah.
the chocolate as well. They're similar
It does
flavors.
have a definite creamy aroma
Yeah.
to it.
It's got it is not like some bourbons that have a really big kiss.
Yeah.
No,
not at all. It's
It
very
is-
mild.
It is very
I
mild.
don't
You
detect
get
any fruit in this one here like
No.
you do in
No.
some.
It,
well, other than the
Interesting
corn,
that
according
you
to
say that,
Marcus.
Francis. Any other comments?
One of the things, and this is going to sound extremely weird, one of the things I tend to compare a lot of these bourbons to is Wild Turkey, because that pair makes it one of my favorites, and it's very, as we've discussed, it makes that very noticeable there. And it's kind of like that's how I
Wild Turkey with that pear and vanilla.
That's right.
Really comes through.
It really does, and that's kind of my barometer when it goes to is this fruity? Does that have that type of thing? And this doesn't have any of that.
I like the.
It's more grainy.
No, I don't know about that.
Not in a bad way. I don't mean texture wise. I mean that type of a.
I like
taste.
the finish on this because it's more of the hug.
Yeah.
I'm getting the very back of the throat up
high
to
thorax area.
all
right.
above the stomach.
It reminds me of a hint of crab apple.
Okay. Now,
not a regular apple, but that crab
sure,
apple.
Yeah, that tartness.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not getting any kind of that tartness there.
No,
I'm actually holding my bourbon Bible here, and it's a wonderful book. It has a lot of bourbons listed, photograph of the bottle, gives a rundown on them, proof, so forth, what type of still it was made in, and descriptions of flavors.
That's important too. One of these days we'll have to talk more about that.
Yeah,
I need to learn more first.
Rundown on the flavor profile that they've got in here. Blanton's Original is what we had. Has a sweet nose of oak and fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Tropical pineapple plus a little lemon and blackberry is what they're saying.
Really? See,
on top of the notes of almond and lemon shortbread. Over time, oak riches become more prominent, along with flavors of juicy apple and creamy marzipan.
Yep.
Or however you say that.
Marzipan.
Yeah.
There you go, marzipan. It's my accent.
Almond.
More apple notes appear on the palate, and it grows more spiced in its flavor.
Yeah.
Interesting. I did not get most
y'all
of that.
That's where I was
few
feeling
of those and picked up maybe a few things.
that crab apple.
Yeah,
kind
that's
of-
say
All subjective.
Yeah.
Well, I
It
know,
is.
but we need
It
you
is.
to pull that out every time that we do this. So
Well,
that
not
way-
everything's listed in here,
I
but
understand, but when
Well, and I don't know that we want
Especially all
to
the new
embarrass
ones.
ourselves too much.
we will learn. I'm thinking.
but I thought that was good with this more higher quality bourbon.
I like that you held on to that because, knowing what to look for colors
It does.
your own impression.
It does.
That's why you
why I
use
waited
glass.
and let
Yes.
everybody.
So yeah, I mean,
Very
I
well.
thought almonds was very interesting.
yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. A little sweetness of some apples,
With kind of the bitterness of the almond.
and then what was the other one? Blackberries.
Blackberry, a lemon touch in there.
Definitely a lot of sweet, though.
Yes,
Yes.
Well, that's
very
true.
sweet.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the first sentence in the
I didn't get
description.
that-
It's
I
a
didn't get the
sweet
right-
bourbon.
yeah.
There's,
it does have
there's
sweet.
another thing that now that I think about it that I'm getting a slight hint of would be the scent, since I'm not doing flavors, of a honeysuckle.
I can see that.
Yeah,
I can see that. You're exactly
That's
right.
sweetness.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's very subjective to whoever's doing the tasting and so forth. I mean, there is no, well, there can be wrong answers. I won't go quite that far, but
Right.
from person to person, there can be a very wide range of what you pick up and what somebody else did, no matter what kind of professional
Exactly.
tasting and nose they have.
And one thing to remember, your taste buds are, whatever you're tasting now, are influenced by the last thing you ate and drank and how long ago
absolutely.
that was.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
So there's a lot of factors that go into what comes out when you taste something, which is one of the great things of why it's such an art form of pairing different alcohols with foods, because foods can enhance or hurt the flavor of what you're drinking. Now, of course, we had a big Southern breakfast. Well, not quite a Southern because we didn't have the gravy this morning,
No, I didn't have gravy or grits this morning.
but it was pretty close to it though.
Yeah.
That smoked sausage was pretty darn good. I
yeah,
gotta
local.
say.
Steak sausage, local product,
That's
as
right,
Francis is getting ready to say. But I go one step further, and I put it on my smoker
Yes,
when
that
I
was
cook
unique.
it out. And it actually adds a little more spiciness to it a lot
It
of times.
does,
With
yes.
that real oaky flavor in there.
Yeah, Jake sells all over the world. I mean, it's made in the 150 Quick Stop on Springfield Road, just outside of Bardstown. Yet another one of our great treasures here in Nelson County, Kentucky.
That is true. All right, let's bring her back around to the history part. I think we kind of
Well,
did our tasting pretty well there.
I think so too. One of our better ones. I do want to talk about just a little bit about Prohibition because it's kind of like that ultimate disruption of everything. We kind of
sledgehammer that hit the mirror.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That your image.
It was a devastating thing.
It really was. Very few, but a few distillers were able to survive this. Brown-Forman was one of them because they were able to get exemptions for medicinal purposes.
I think there was
medicinal purposes.
6 major distilleries, I think, during the war effort. National distillers.
Right.
My grandfather, this is where my family history, on my mother's side, was the transportation manager at National Distillers in charge of all the rail cars going in and out of Kentucky hauling alcohol for the war effort.
Yeah.
So he was exempt from service for World War II.
Right. And of course that's about a little less than 10 years from when Prohibition was repealed. But the industry
It took a while to recover.
It took exactly. That's my point. Is that it was such a devastating action. Those few major distillers that did survive, a lot of the little ones never recovered. That's the J.W. Dant is a good example because my grandfather actually worked for them during the war because and it wasn't long after that they closed up shop completely. They just couldn't do it.
I got a question for you because this is something that really should have thought about, but I hadn't really considered this until now. Obviously, the employment in this area is heavily tied to bourbon.
Absolutely, yes, it was.
So, was there an exodus from Bardstown, New Haven area to Louisville or anywhere else
there was.
looking for jobs?
There was. GE was built by a lot of the folks out here when that plant came on online, and this was in the 50s.
During Prohibition, prior, because
during that,
because that's obviously when.
See, that's the problem is it's just prior to the Depression too. Most people out here were still tied to the land. They were not. They were able to sustain themselves by farming.
Okay.
This was not a type of thing. It wasn't very urbanized. Everything stayed rural out here.
Still not urbanized.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's not something like you needed that job or you were destitute. No, you owned your own land out here. You owned your own place. There's not a lot of renting out here. There never was. Although there was some of that. Some
sharecropping.
Well, mostly it was farm hands that you would have if you didn't own it. You worked on local farms, but that still continued. You're selling the product.
Right,
I
understand
distilleries anymore.
I understand that distillers are not going to have 1,000 employees.
Right, because they're all small. They're
all small. Well, yes, at this time they would have been small, but
here
the processes are not. Depending on what part you're talking about, there's not a lot of labor. I mean, obviously, when you're moving the barrels and you're doing that part, that's going to be fairly labor intensive, especially back then.
Once you reach a certain size, there was more. But of that.
It's not hundreds of people working.
No,
on a line,
and a lot of
when you get into the bottling and everything, there was quite a few. There's more than you were thinking. Later on,
later stage. How much, and that leads to the next question: how much of the bottling was done here? Because originally, bourbon was done by the barrel, and sent off.
Yeah, once the bottles became a thing, absolutely. I mean. The Barton Distillery, for example, where my mother worked in Bardstown. I mean, that's what they did. I mean, the bottling operation was there, and most of the distilleries, Heaven Hill was that way. Most of the locals around here, they all had their own bottling operation that went worldwide.
Okay, see,
you're talking 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, where a lot of that happened. There's a great tendency here as time went on post World War II in the 50s affluence. A lot of folks would relocate to the southern area of Louisville, Fern Creek, where I live, J-Town, Butchell, things like that, because the GE plant was there, and that was an enormous, basically a ground change.
That happened everywhere.
People truck plants.
Or truck plants too.
People in Kentucky went to. I mean, that's how I came about. My parents independently moved to Michigan for jobs in the factories in the 50s.
And that's similar here. And but ironically, most of the folks here, they would relocate to that southern area of Jefferson County now, which is very, very built up now. But it was all farmlands there. So they kept those farms as well as their factory jobs, which was unique because you could do that. It wasn't something that you could do when those people that lived downtown who basically you lived in these shotgun houses. There's reasons for that, tax reasons and stuff like that. All that industrial area, that was huge.
Well, now, one of the things that you had happen a lot during the Prohibition era, as far as these farmers, a lot of them converted over to tobacco.
Correct.
Or marijuana. Now, marijuana, its popularity ended up being shipped out of here up to the major cities, and you'll hear that a lot in the songs during the blues era. They'd call them the Vipers. That's where they would be smoking marijuana, and the export from here was huge. Like I was mentioning earlier, it was for decades the number one cash crop here.
Yeah, it took over in place of moonshine.
It took over in place of the moonshine.
Yeah, in many respects, the moonshine started that whole illegal underground economy.
So then what happened was you had marijuana outlawed in 1938. Tobacco started to have more of a prevalence here. Right. Brown-Forman took up with tobacco.
Philip Morris was there, and Brian Williamson, and
R.J. Reynolds. Yeah,
R.J. Reynolds. Yeah, they were huge.
Then here recently, tobacco has gone out of favor.
Right.
But the bourbon has come back. Mm-hmm. But ironically, those exemptions that we were talking about for booze down here are coming back to this state in the form of our medical marijuana exemption that they're advertising here, which
starting in 2025,
which will be allegedly in 2025. They haven't quite got all the bugs worked out on that.
I like that we have now a resident marijuana historian in the Emperor here.
Ooh. Oh, well,
he has a good base of knowledge. Let's just put it that way.
More than the rest of us.
Hold up, no,
more than the rest of us.
I'm not. My family, however, is in the legal, as my wife would call it, weed business, which is the hemp and CBD and THC and all that. But also we've got our farm, for example, is on East Whiskey Run Road because of the moonshiners.
Yeah, it's in southern Indiana.
In southern Indiana. And there are a number of things like that here, too.
Yeah.
Moonshining and evading the revenuers is a Kentucky tradition.
It is.
And it is still alive these days.
It is.
I know people making moonshine right now. Mm-hmm. And going back during Prohibition time, I had a great uncle on my father's side that used to run moonshine from Hightstown, Kentucky, just up above us out of those hollows into Louisville every day of the week on a weekly basis.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of that went on out through here. And like I think I mentioned in the show prep, my grandfather and his brother owned a general store in the 1920s. In Little New Hope, Kentucky, just literally over the hills from where we're at. And they sold all the product to the moonshiners. And literally my grandfather, who was unmarried at the time because he was younger, made a huge fortune in that business.
And that's also the start of, this is where you get, those cars are the basis for NASCAR.
It was.
And racing here in the United States.
Yeah, because they learned, you got to be able to outrun them revenues.
Yep.
And they had the knowledge of the back roads to do it in the right vehicle.
That's right.
Yep. Right. Well, and that all that distilling knowledge had to be used somewhere.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
it's found in really interesting piece. We talked about the all the different functions or pieces of the process that went into making bourbon so unique, and why Kentucky's the yes, legally you can make bourbon anywhere. The best legally.
Yeah.
Listen, dude, listen.
I know.
Legally you can make it anywhere. But true bourbon aficionados know the best bourbon worthy of the name is made in Kentucky.
Right.
Well, I think there's some good products being made elsewhere.
I didn't say they weren't good. But, all those factors that go into the state, the water, the climate, all of those things, it's very difficult to find a place where you can replicate that.
No, that is true.
So we have advantages nobody else has.
Right. I don't want to put anybody off that might be a future sponsor if they hadn't been in Indiana or Tennessee, Ohio, or wherever,
Texas, Colorado, Nevada.
We'll take anybody's
really
money.
I mean, there's.
I do like the fact that you're pointing out, though, they're just different based on where you're at, where it's made.
Right. And that's true for
different.
almost anything you make that has such a subjective aspect
because
to it,
it is
because there's
so,
so many different things that go into
It's
it.
so tied to climate.
Well,
and local.
the mash bill.
Even my bourbon seeds surrounding us is different than the ones in Indiana.
Exactly.
Oh, how? Due to soil and weather conditions. I
Exactly.
mean,
The
it even
seeds
goes
you
back to the
use.
beginning.
Right. So there's an interesting experiment that Jefferson's Bourbon did in 2016.
The voyage.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I find this to be fascinating. So bourbon initially, as we talked about, was transported by river on the barges. And so, now everything's bottled on site and shipped off. So he did an experiment where he replicated the original waterway transport, took barrels,
Which again,
put it on a barge.
You would start at Louisville, basically,
Yeah.
and float down the Ohio and float down the Mississippi to New Orleans.
Right. He sent 2 barrels on a barge, and then sent 2 more to New York City. And first down the Ohio and Mississippi, and then along the Intercoastal Highway. And then it brought same batch of the whiskey that remained in Louisville during the same period. So it compared stuff that stayed here versus what was transported. What was transported on the waterways apparently was like an order of magnitude better than what stayed here in Louisville. It was molecularly different. They actually analyzed the 2 samples down to the molecular level. And Popular Mechanics documented the test. So this is all very scientific. And the sample that made the waterborne journey was mature beyond its age, richer with new flavors of tobacco, vanilla, caramel, and honey. It was some of the best bourbon any of us had ever drunk. Now, again, that's a very subjective statement.
But it's done by experts who know what they're talking about.
Yeah. It was theorized that the action of the gentle sloshing of the whiskey in barrels for a period of 2 to 4 weeks during the barge trip led to a dramatic improvement in smoothness and taste. And chemical analysis of the 2 samples revealed significant differences in their profiles.
Well, just basically, you think that kind of makes sense. The constant agitation and movement kept it from settling and sediment, where in the rick houses, when they move them around and change position and stuff, but you're having it constant in this. It makes it smoother.
Right.
So you can imagine that the original product leaving New Orleans is probably considerably different, or was, than what we consume today.
Right, right. Now, it's not necessarily to say that automatically made it better, because there's, again, so many factors go into making
And as we know, a lot of it was highly adulterated as it made its journeys.
Yes, the farther along the journey it got, the more adulterated
that's
it was.
the origin of the bottled and bond idea.
Yes.
Of where
I'm glad you
government's
mentioned that,
ensuring, and becomes the 1880s, basically 1890s, where it takes off, is the idea that the government says this is bourbon now.
Right, because it was, as you said, it was very adulterated. The farther out west you got, you'd be lucky if you got anything of the original stuff by the time you got out there.
Right, yeah, and 1897 is the old Forester Bottle and Bond year that they made theirs.
And the distilleries were behind this.
Oh yeah,
it was their idea. It wasn't something.
Well, yes, because they're putting their name on those at this point, so it's very much a quality issue for them and a brand issue.
So this is.
I think you need to note how much further this experiment went, though. Not just on the river travel, Oceans 11.
Yes,
I mean,
Jefferson's
Ocean.
Yeah. So yes, it has been taken to I think Jefferson's Ocean was done before the experiment, but yes, they have experimented with doing the aging in different places, and of course, there's plenty of different barrels that's aged in a second time, cognac barrels and so forth. Wine barrels.
The latest voyage is around the tropical equator right now. That's going to be released here.
Who's doing
anytime. Jefferson.
They're doing it. Okay.
Yes, they're starting to vary their voyages on the ocean now, according to latitude and longitude, to see how much difference that makes too.
Right, and I'm sure it will. I think that the motion is probably the most important aspect. Supposedly, the stuff aged on the ocean does have a distinct flavor. I have tried it. I mean, it didn't stand out as anything super exciting to me. It wasn't a bad bourbon at all. Don't get me wrong.
I'm curious, did you notice any saltiness to it where it might have picked up from being on the ocean? I mean, you'd have to think them oak barrels would absorb some of the saltiness.
I'm sure it did. It's been many years since I've tried it.
Yeah, we had a bottle we tried. That was a while ago. Yeah, we did.
Because I only remember having it at the rectory.
Yeah, no, we had a Jefferson's Ocean once, and you guys didn't like it that much.
Yeah, like I said, it's not one that was...
It was gifted to me, and I want to say that both of you guys panned it.
Yeah, and now it'd be interesting to go back and see.
We've learned a lot since then.
Did we have it neat? Did we have it on the rocks? How did we? It's one of the things that when we do our project where we talked about recently about cutting out the bourbon breaks for another project, and we need to catalog all the bourbons that we've tried and how we have tried them.
Very much so.
We really need to I think get a real analysis going of what we've done, because there are some bourbons I think we need to revisit and try differently than how we did originally.
And there's so many that we haven't even bothered to try.
Right.
And just like you noted, the ice is not necessarily a good thing with this Blanton's, a large amount of it. So even varying to the point of try it straight first, a small and a taster, and then try some over ice. And
when I have
divide it up between 2 and 2.
Exactly. When I have bourbon, I try, even when I drop the ice cube in or the ice ball, I try to take a sip immediately so that I can get a baseline. And the baseline for this was very good, this Blanton's. It was a great baseline immediately. That's why it's one of the few bourbons where I would have very, very few problems with taking straight, having a neat glass of this. Because in general, I just love the way the ice and the water cause the bourbon to bloom. This doesn't have a lot of room to bloom because it's already a good profile.
Yeah.
Right.
True. Very true.
And that's unusual. Whereas there are some that are almost undrinkable without that. Jim Beam Black, Martin had a very visceral response to as a neat bourbon. But because I had it on the rocks, and after we swapped, we both agreed with the other's position. Yeah, this is definitely not neat on the rocks for that.
Yeah, Old Forester Prohibition style was kind of that way. We all three of us loved it, absolutely loved it. But it was so potent because it's right up 120 proof.
Yeah,
it was just we were doing ourselves a disservice by not blooming it with some ice. We figured that out.
At that proof, that's definitely a sipping bourbon.
Well, absolutely. I mean, because we went through a little bit of it, and I had it neat that first time, and man, I had a headache for a day after that one. It was just wow.
It kicked you in the drawers, huh?
Somewhere, yeah.
But the bourbon industry around here, I can think back to when I was 18 out of high school, and everybody just about around here applied for try to get into the distilleries to work.
Oh, I imagine, yeah.
And I mean, it was a massive waiting list for them to even get down to you once you got your name on a list. I mean, we're looking at years amount of time in a lot of cases, unless, of course, you knew somebody.
Sure.
That's true. Well, and most of the distilleries around here, the actual labor, it's all unionized. So it's not that different than the auto industry or GE or these other places. So you were very secure. My father worked.
Once you get in at one of these places, unless you screw up.
That's correct.
Well,
that's why my father made his living. I mean, was because he worked for the Seagram plant, literally across the river in Athertonville, Kentucky. That's what put me through college because they had a scholarship program through there, and half of New Haven worked at that plant. My father and anybody those ages. And this was through the 70s. The plant actually caught fire, and it didn't burn down, but it did burn in like 74. So they ended up closing operations. My father was beside himself because he'd worked there from the 50s and 60s and always halfway through the 70s. And they moved but they didn't fire anybody. They just made them all go to Lawrenceburg because they had another plant up there, which is just up the Bluegrass Parkway. It was a toll road in those days. And they would all go in shifts in a big carpool, and that's where they would work. And that lasted, it wasn't that long, 5 or 6 years. I do remember one story my father told about how it was a toll road in those days, and whoever was driving, they take turns, had to pay the toll. And it was in coins usually. And there's one gentleman, I won't give his name because for all I know, he's still around, but he couldn't see. And they were going up for the midnight shift one time, and he had a bag of pennies. Pennies for like 50-cent toll. He's got it in pennies. He can't see. He throws to the automatic bucket to take it so they can keep going, and he misses.
Oh.
So you've got 5 big adults in the dark crawling around on the pavement trying to pick up all these pennies so they can get past the toll and not be late to work. So that went on for a long, long time.
No cell phones to use for flashlights.
No, nothing like that. So this is just we want to talk about a comedy of errors. Gosh, the guy's name was Shorty. I can tell you that. And it was just that's just what you did. Eventually, that whole process stopped. The Athertonville plant out there got sold off. My father stayed. They kept it around a long time, and Daddy was a senior man in the union out there. He was actually a steward.
That's a good job.
Well, nobody else would do it because
shop stewards.
Well, basically, he's the guy that whenever you had to apply for any benefits, they came to him. So we had people.
Well, he's your advocate.
He's your advocate. So
he's the first level.
So we had people come by the house all the time. They're getting their checks because they're off on sick leave or different stuff, whatever the heck that.
Yeah, there's a grievance. You got to go to your steward.
That's
all that.
right. Well, he did that. God bless him. He had he did a lot of good work for a lot of good people for that.
Interesting point, though, about the sequence plant you're talking about. It's located in what was a dry county for years.
That's right,
It just went wet in the recent past.
That's correct.
Didn't that have something to do with them not reopening that after the fire because taxes was going to be so much higher out in that being a dry county, I heard?
That might be the case. I don't know that. I didn't recall hearing that. I mean, as a kid when that happened.
Yeah. So,
but they did maintain it for many years because through the 80s, because my dad was one of the senior guys, they needed somebody to stick around and work out there to make sure the place didn't burn down again, what was left of it. So Daddy actually worked out there for a very long time, 5 or 6, 7 years. As a union worker. It was him and one other guy. That whoever were the most senior guys did that.
I really
they sold the plant.
Yeah, I really like this. Is super cool. We really talked history of bourbon through the lens of this local area.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
mostly through Francis's family.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, it's terrific. But
we should have known that when we said Francis could do the captain.
I wasn't signed up to do this. Cajun.
I volunteered him.
Yeah. I mean, for that reason, though, to give that personal view of it.
Well, and that's what makes it interesting, is that personal touch.
Yeah. But there are a couple of bigger questions that I'm wondering about. And maybe you guys know, or maybe we could research real quick while we talk.
Yeah.
But, again, the name bourbon is kind of this, why did it end up called that? It's sort of speculative.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Nobody
different
really knows for sure.
stories.
Certainly it probably has something to do with the Bourbon family.
The French.
Well, yes,
the New Orleans, too, being Bourbon Street. Well, a lot of this ended up in a party area.
Right. Well, and it is related to the dynasty some way, whether it's...
I mean, until 1803, that's a French possession. That's where it's going anyway.
Well, and Bourbon County here originally in as part of Virginia is named after the dynasty.
Right.
So it definitely has that tie. But the question is, geographically here, where does it come from? And there's a lot of stories. Some of it say, well, it's Bourbon County.
No.
Well, Bourbon County was divided up into, because it was one of the largest, because one of the original counties, and it was subdivided very quickly. And when I found this interesting when I was doing my reading, when it would go to the port to get onto the flatboats and the barges, often the area was called Old Bourbon. All of the counties surrounded that was
So what is it
that was
putting
the point
on my
of origin.
boat?
Yeah,
Well, it's corn liquor from
Old Bourbon. So that's honestly,
bourbon.
I think that's probably the most credible.
That ending up down on Bourbon Street and all. I'd say the same name probably came from several different sources, to be honest about it, if I had to make a guess.
Probably,
and they are somewhat related,
probably
yes.
One of those things where there are several different ways that this product, this name
because the
of
name
bourbon
was so prominent in several areas where it was made, where it ended up, where it was shipped.
Yeah, because Louisville's named after
I was going to say,
French
make
king.
sure, exactly. There's a
French
French influence at this time, and some of that's Thomas Jefferson, and that connection. He was very much that, and is you've got the Revolution, which has just happened. We owe a lot in our minds at the time to the French and their intervention. So there's a affinity that we have for the French kings, which at the time when this was coming up,
so
this is right prior to the Revolution over there.
Yeah.
So
it would be very natural
correct.
give this product that you're very proud of
a royal name,
right?
And the easy one. Certainly, you wouldn't name it Hanover.
No,
right.
Or Windsor, but you would name it.
Well, Windsor comes much later.
Yeah, bourbon.
Yeah.
But anything
that pokes a stick in the eye of George III. Everybody's for that. Over
Absolutely,
here these days.
yes.
Yeah.
I like the point of origin with old bourbon being stamped on the barrels as being the most likely.
Yeah, point
You
of
got to
origin.
give them flatboat fellas a shout out of the past. They were some tough SOBs
Yes.
moving them things.
Yes.
That was a
'Cause
dangerous
even though
job.
they floated downstream, they had to pole it back upstream for most of it.
Yes.
I mean, that was unless it got a little wind once in a while. They actually had some primitive sails they could unfurl to help.
Right, it's
them
not
out,
like you
but
can
that was rare.
do a full rigging like you would on a ship.
Well, yeah,
They
I
were
mean,
some tough men.
Yeah, Lincoln did it. I mean, and that's how.
Yes, you had to be strong. You had to be tough because it was a dangerous job.
Well, yeah, because a lot of people would want to steal it. Very much so.
Right. Well,
yeah. Slavery, pirates on the river. I mean, it was a thing.
Yeah,
not
river
just the
pirates.
ocean.
So
You had another
my
point.
Yeah, you had one more point.
yeah, my other question was
so we can wrap this up.
So we get to New Orleans with this stuff. Who's buying it? What were we reselling it on our own coast, or did it make it to Europe?
Both. Most of it was local, though. Most of the sales were local. It's just they didn't want to. They didn't. It wasn't quite big enough to go international at this point. That's too expensive. Did it happen? Sure, but all up and down the East Coast is
But
where
that's
most of this
interesting
happens.
to think. We would think of, well, if I've got the product in Kentucky and I want to get it to Boston or
Yeah, that's
South
right.
Carolina for people to drink,
Yep.
I'm going to go overland. But no,
it's
you
down-
really
well,
couldn't.
No,
No.
there was no
not.
transport
So
to
you
do it
had-
effectively.
Yeah,
had to
because you
get it
don't do
to
this
New
by
Orleans.
wagon. There's no
right.
such
Those
system.
barrels would have broken open before you gone
Well,
100 miles.
That's
Well,
right.
getting through the forest. I mean, there was
Over the mountains.
Why? Yeah,
Over the
exactly.
mountains.
That's right. Yeah.
Well,
So
I mean-
it's irony that you're saying we're going down around and around the Horn, so to speak.
Yeah, you have to go all the way to the
A long way to
around
get there.
Florida
Well-
and come back
Yeah.
around.
Well, and it was still probably faster.
Yeah.
yeah.
Very much
Oh,
so.
much
yeah.
so.
Yes.
Much so.
one of the things, though,
It's one of the reasons Vicksburg was so important during the Civil War.
Well, yeah.
It's because it was a blockage for
Yeah.
all that traffic.
Yep.
Well,
Go
no,
ahead, Marcus.
Bourbon, one of the things that you can't pull out or take away from or separate from the bourbon itself is the mystique, the mythos behind it. Just like a lot of Kentucky, everything from Daniel Boone and the settlement of this state
Right.
to everything is myth and lore and writing. We're looking at during Prohibition and
Yep.
during 20s, 30s. You're looking at things like F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, all of these things, and adding on to that lore, which is part of what entrenched Kentucky bourbon, Kentucky tobacco into the wealthy
Yeah,
aristocracy
it
in the
becomes
East
part of
Coast.
the consciousness of wealthy East Coasters. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say,
Robert.
bourbon, like many drinks, has had its ups and downs as far as that prestige.
Oh yeah,
We've talked about before on the show how when we've talked about bourbon, growing up, bourbon was not the drink of choice in movies and television shows. It was Scotch,
yeah.
maybe some
And clear too for a while there too.
yeah,
Vodkas
And-
and so forth.
exactly. Martinis was a big thing.
Shaken, not stirred.
And now it is the go-to drink for prestige or whatever in those things.
And the bourbon industry has certainly contributed a lot to that.
Yes.
It's worked hard to do that, but the product,
marketing, the
Yep.
product placement, all of that stuff, it takes effort.
We talked about Maker's Mark as being kind of one of those gold standards, at least from
as
the
far as
beginning.
marketing. Yeah,
marketing. Yeah,
They took everybody else to school, and
yeah. There was a time
it was
you
genius.
couldn't pick up a magazine, almost any magazine, without a Maker's Mark ad
and all you
talking
need
about
to
the
see,
red wax.
That's all you need to see is that red wax, and all of a sudden they've done it.
Yep.
And they sued Evan Williams when Evan Williams started putting black wax on their single barrels and so forth, saying, no, this is our thing, but that didn't hold up.
Yeah, that's not something you can prevent.
Right, yeah,
Yeah, as long as they don't do red wax.
Right. They
If it had
can't do
been
red.
red,
Anybody else can use a different color.
Yeah.
But I can clearly see the writing on the wall. We will need a part 2 on this, going from prohibition to modern day.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Time when bourbon fell out of favor and so forth, and when it came back, because it's just not enough time.
Well, yeah, because just the modern discussion alone is just everything. I mean, it's so different.
These don't necessarily have to be the last couple of points, but
well, one of the things that really struck out when we were here at the Bourbon Festival down here in Bardstown, Kentucky, yesterday, and that was there was just one small section of it that was isolated off that was for the smaller distilleries.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the craft section is what they called it.
The craft section, and there was
30, 40 in there
at
least.
The sign said 50 plus.
50 plus, okay.
And I wouldn't doubt that. They were.
Yeah, we didn't get to near all of them.
Oh yeah, no,
it's
they
a
were
part of the industry to begin training people to do craft.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up
and
that sort
not,
of thing. Yeah, because I want to talk about
and not
that
just
quick.
do big places.
Yeah.
Which were all surrounding the craft area. They had the big ones had their own section.
The big places are not interested in crushing the small ones.
Yeah,
right.
They want the small ones out there.
Well,
and there's
the market is so big.
Yeah,
there's room for all of them.
Yeah, there's programs and things. Again, the idea is to try to make Kentucky like Napa.
Yeah,
Napa for wine and Kentucky for bourbon. They want servers and they want people in the hospitality industry to know something about bourbon.
Yes.
So they can serve.
There are a number of
customers
bourbon-specific restaurants and drinking establishments.
Oh yes, the Bourbon Trail here.
Not just that. I mean, that's designed around the distillery. I mean, like if you go to Louisville, there are bourbon bars, like the cigar bars.
Oh yeah.
There are places that are specifically designed around that, knowing your bourbon.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that about the craft and how they like that, and I think that kind of ties into a couple of things I was interested in talking about real quick, because we're going
to give Robert the Hammer the last word here.
No, it doesn't necessarily be the last word, but
close.
One thing I found very fascinating by what Cajun said about the waiting list to get jobs in the industry. What that speaks to is not just that it was a good paying job.
Yeah.
So.
But it's kind of a prestigious job.
It was considered that in this area, yes.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
That's
for a blue collar job, it was the pinnacle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a blue collar job that comes with a high level of prestige, and for a job that is unionized, one of the highest skill level required, beyond the moving the grunt labor of moving bourbon barrels and things like that. But when you get into the making part of things, that's a very you have to have
and
knowledge.
Still is, I would say, to be fair, really.
Master distillers, which every distilling operation has them, are held in the highest of prestige.
Yeah,
and a shout out to the women master distillers now that are appearing, because legally they could not be one in years past. I mean, it hasn't been all that long.
They
could not legally be a master distiller.
Wow,
women couldn't.
We were a little backward in that. We finally fixed it. It sounds like
that is shocking, because why would you think? Well, the only reason you have laws like that is somebody tried to do it. So I'm presuming that's how that started.
Probably.
So.
Well,
assessment.
Because it was held in such prestige, it was one of those things that those in power over it did not want to share.
Yes, I'm sure there was probably a similar law that at the time they would have used the term like no colored allowed to be master distillers.
Good question. Don't know if it came up, but
it's not like there's a whole lot of them that in this particular area necessarily.
To be honest, it is such an artistic position. It really is. It's very much an art.
Yes,
it's got a lot of science in it, but it was very much an art.
It's an art and a skill.
And
in a family, it's often handed down.
2015 was the year that Kentucky named its first female master distiller. 2015, so not all that long ago, less than 10 years.
Yeah, and as Martin was saying, part of that's who becomes a master distiller is a family issue.
Because they own it.
Now the conglomerates, that's a lither bit different.
And that's something we can talk about in the modern history.
When you talk about the Beam family or Heaven Hill, these family-owned operations, they're keeping that master distiller in the family. Russell family.
And that's an interesting point, because where the families are still involved, even when they're owned by conglomerates, they keep that connection.
That's right.
Yes.
Because that's important.
They do not advertise the fact that a Japan conglomerate owns a distillery over here to too much extent.
Right.
I mean, it's public record, but they're not advertising that we own Jim Beam now.
Right.
That's kind of staying in the background. They're smart on that.
Yeah. Well, because they realize the local color and the local character is part of what makes it so good. You can't lose that. You can't.
It's part of the mystique.
It's right. Because it is, as I said, it's an art.
Yeah.
Very much so, that uses science for its own business. All right.
So, hail the Bourbon Empire.
Hail the Bourbon Empire.
Hail to the Bourbon Empire.
All right. Let's.
So does that put us to what's next, Francis?
Yes, we are going to have a code of honor next time around. We've retooled this a little bit. With 5 of us on here, we quickly came to the understanding, let's just pick one really good one, and we'll let whoever's hosting, the captain it and pick it. And we're going to use a humorist next time that Cajun has picked out, Josh Billings. He is not well known, but he should be. And this man was very, very amazingly astute. And we've got a really
He's
great
contemporary of Twain, and there's a lot of that similarity there.
Very much so, yeah. And we're gonna chew, swallow, and digest one of his most famous quotes on our next episode. So make sure you're here; it'll be great.
We hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes drop every second and fourth Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern, just in time for your morning commute. And every fifth Friday, we drop a special Hoopajube episode. Spread the word we are on all the major platforms, and leave us a review. That helps others find us. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com. Join us next time. Same snake time, same otter channel.